under the Kansas. There it is, the Kansas Open Meetings Act, and we are recorded. I'd like my other committee members to introduce themselves.
This is Steve Waugh from here in Topeka. I'm on the advisory board for the state library, and I represent the general public.
Hello, Rhoda McLaughlin Ramirez, Cali College, representing two-year schools.
Randy, if you would introduce yourself.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you, Tom. I'm Randy Roberts, Pittsburgh State University Academic Libraries, and currently serving as chair of the State Library of Kansas Advisory Board.
Let's speaking of the state library, Ray, I'll let you introduce yourself, and then Charles.
Ray Walling, state librarian.
Hello, I'm Charles Macheers. I'm the general counsel for the state libraries.
Okay, everyone else, thank you for joining. We won't go through introductions. We need to consider the agenda that was presented. Steve and Rhoda, do you consider this agenda okay?
I move to approve the agenda.
Second.
Okay, motion and approved. We will work with the agenda we've been given. The next point on the agenda is the approval of our June 1st minutes. Those are the minutes of this subcommittee.
I'll also
Okay.
move to approve the minutes.
All right.
And I will second.
Okay, minutes approved. Let's get into the meeting. The point of our meeting today is to look at the Central Kansas Library System Annual Plan and Budget for 2024. Let me close out so we won't get that. And then to perhaps develop an endorsement for the full State Library of Kansas board. We asked for recommendations from our committee as well as from the state librarian, and the state library has compiled those to us. First off is the one that I wrote, and I just wanted to say that I was writing this letter to try to summarize some of the main points and as to what we needed to do and why. The way I see it, and Ray does a really good job of spelling it out in his letter, but what we're generally looking at is the elimination of processing grants, other MOUs to both Hayes and Salina Public Library. That money is then redistributed through other grant programs from the regional library system. It's my opinion that that is a massive reduction to both Salina and Hayes, and that even if the board in Central Kansas, that's what they want to do, they should allot more time in a transition away from those grants. I didn't come up with specifics. This is not an amendment or anything. Also, this is not the sole task of our committee. We're also looking into the various communications between Hayes and the Central Kansas Library System. And then Hayes has other concerns that they've brought up about the executive committee, the structure of Central Kansas Library System, things along those lines. But for today's purpose, we're primarily going to be focusing on the plan. That's what my letter just sort of spelled out. I don't know, did Rhoda, Steve, did you have any questions about what I wrote?
No, none from me, Tom, at this time.
Okay. Let's move on to Ray's amendment recommendation. And you all had a chance to look at that, I hope. Steve or Rhoda, do you have any questions for Ray before we ask him to make some general statements?
Tom and Ray, I guess this is Steve. The only thing that I hope you'll do in your explanation, Ray, is make sure to come up at the very top level of the budget. And I'm having trouble looking at it from the standpoint of what's the overall net difference between what was submitted by CKLS and what it is that your amendments would turn that into. I know there's pieces moving around in several different areas. I just, not being from the library world, I'm not sure I understand all of those pieces, but I can understand the top line. So make sure that as you talk about this, Ray, if you could to tie back to that as well. Thank you.
Thanks for your input, Steve. And Ray, this is generally a question for you and I don't know, maybe Charles as well. When I first got your letter with your amendment, my first thought was, oh, we're providing an amendment. We're amending the plan. I was a bit surprised by that, but then I realized that actually we, as a state library, as far as I can see it, and based on the statutes, the State Library Advisory Board does have the authority to amend a system plan. I don't know. I was just sort of assuming it had to go back to the Central Kansas Library System Board. But based on what I saw, it doesn't look like that if the full State Library of Kansas Advisory Board chose to put an amendment, it doesn't look like it requires going through the Central Kansas Library System Executive Committee. Is that right?
Well, I think I'll let Charles respond after this, but I think first thing to recognize is that the plan currently has been tabled at the State Library Board level. So once it is brought back to the State Library Board, consider we continue on with the consideration process from that point. Under Regulation 5415, it says regional systems cooperating libraries shall submit annually to the State Library Advisory Commission for review and amendment a program of services and tentative budget of the regional system of cooperating libraries. So that is the regulation that the idea of an amendment is coming from.
Yeah, I read that too, and I don't know if Charles, if you have any input, but that sounds exactly like what our understanding of it is, right?
Hold on, let me pull up that reg real quick. I had it in my notes, but I didn't have the actual verbatim. Yeah, there's not much more to add. You have, the board has authority to approve and to recommend, require amendments to the plan before it's approved.
Okay. As a comment that I have on Ray's proposal, I do appreciate, Ray, how you spelled it out, that the system, the regional system, is trying to move away from MOU funds, from MOU spending, and trying to have it all, everything pass through via grants and so forth, and to try to not have these special funding items. And the documents that we've received go way back, have letters from way back explaining the establishment of funding to both Hayes and Salina for processing, among other things. But the intent of the system plan was to eliminate MOUs and just have things more general. And I think that I understand that desire, and in many ways it makes sense, but the repercussions of that are what we have to look at. Ray, do you have any comments about the amendment that you proposed, or anything that you want to highlight to myself, Steve, or Rhoda?
So going back to what Steve said, to try to do this at a top level, I'm going to go ahead and bring up the actual document if that's okay. Give me 1 second.
Yeah,
here.
that's great. Appreciate that.
Should go up now. You guys seen the PDF document? Okay. So during the June 9th meeting, one of the lines of questioning I asked to the director of the Central Kansas Library System was essentially comparing the types of grant funding that was done in the past in 2023 and before to the 2024 funding, looking at it kind of at a top level. I think that Steve's talking about in a way where part of it's population based. In 2023, there was a public library based allotment and a per capita allotment. It's based on the population. In 2024, they got rid of the per capita allotment and increased the public library base allotment. Courier service, as we know, the cost of the courier service went up significantly for next year. So that is factored into their formula. The continuing education, I believe, was $700 per public library. So that has stayed the same. The extended service area grant, or the extended service area category, was 2 different grants, but both of them, I believe, are characterized as being provided because libraries provide out-of-district borrower services. So that includes in 2023, a public library services allotment that was based on the per capita percentage for the whole system. And then, well, the per capita money divided by the whole system. And then in 2024, they are calculating the actual out-of-district borrowers according to the formula that they have proposed and the way they proposed about doing it. So, but the amount of money you see hasn't changed significantly in those first, what I call categories of grants. In resource sharing, while the courier service is a separate line, there is a new resource sharing component that was not provided in 2023, but is in the 2024 grant for $120,000. Then the last line you noticed was the school library services, which is just increasing slightly. So when you look at the $120,000 increase, essentially, for the resource sharing grant category, what struck me was that $101,000 in 2023 was being put toward the MOUs. So what I tried to make a statement at the State Library Board meeting is a good chunk of what's funding this resource sharing, could be argued, is coming from those MOUs. So that's the first part of this. The second part of this is that during the State Library Board meeting, as well as in discussions I had with non-board members before and after the meeting, there was 2 times at least during the board meeting, it was mentioned the idea of a gradual reduction of the MOUs rather than doing it all at once. So what this proposal aims to do is to suggest a way that might be done. What I ended up doing was trying to calculate what this would look like, not just for Hayes and Salina, actually, but more for the other libraries in the system and how it would affect them. We can look at that in a second. But when I looked at how it affects the libraries, specifically Hayes and Salina, I noticed that the combination of the 2024 base allotment, out-of-district borrower allotment, and resource sharing allotment would increase the money they're receiving from those components of the allocations that CKLS provided in 23 by $10,000 and $15,000 for Hayes and Salina respectively. So when I was trying to figure out what reduction to suggest in this gradual reduction idea, I factored that into the formula of, well, they're going to gain $10,000 more from just the component of the allocation / grants, not talking about the MOUs that they're losing, but just talking about that component. And that's where reducing by 10,000 the processing allotment for each of them came from. Because there's also recognition that the other MOUs for collections that those 2 libraries and Great Bend currently receive as well as the technology MOU. So those lines in the 2023 budget that are zeroed out in 2024 are still losses for Hayes and Salina, as well as Great Bend, to make sure we mention that for especially the collections grant. Having said all of that, that's where I thought if there's a loss, there's a loss being received there from those two MOUs. And again, the $10,000, $15,000 increase this first year would help offset the processing allotment reduction. Does that make sense so far to the committee members? No?
It does to me, Ray.
Okay. I just want to make sure everybody's on understanding. Steve, do you have a question? I can't hear you. You're muted.
Sorry, I'm
Okay.
still struggling a little bit with it. Just not only listening, but also just reading what I have that you sent out in this packet. It's
No,
it's a bit unclear to me still.
Okay. Well then, what I think would be helpful. Let me switch modes here to 2024's document that was submitted by CKLS. This is the section that I'm looking at, the grant section right here, and also the MOU section below it. So we obviously know about the $80,000 for the processing MOU that we'll be talking about. And then there's two other MOUs, technology for Hayes and Salina, $5,000 each, and LP, which I think is actually a collection grant for Hayes, Salina, and Great Bend for $16,800 that I believe split three ways between the three libraries. So not only is the issue that's being discussed the loss of the processing money, but Hayes and Salina are also losing money for the collections and technology MOUs. We good so far, Steve?
Yeah, I got that off of this same page too. I understood this page a lot better.
Okay. So what I tried to do back here was look at, and let me one other thing, Steve. Did you understand this table, generally speaking?
Yes.
Okay. So with that information and the idea of a gradual reduction to the processing grant, this proposal puts forward the idea of reducing it by $30,000 for each of them. Okay, instead of doing an MOU, it's suggesting using the word allotment and allocating it on January 31st of 2024. That's when CKLS would pay this money to each of the libraries. The argument then.
Hey, Ray. So
yes, Steve.
in the explanation that you just made,
Yeah.
what I heard from that was the loss of the MOUs that would be partially offset by these two allotments. Have I got that correct?
Correct. So instead of $80,000 for a processing MOU, there would be $60,000 split evenly between Hayes and Salina for processing allotment, which is instead of an actual memorandum of understanding, it would just be immediately paid by January 31st, 2024. So it's suggesting cutting that $80,000 for processing down to $60,000. That clear?
Yeah.
Okay. So then the funding that would be reduced, essentially what I was looking at was this $119,000. We need to fund that $60,000 that we're bringing back into the budget. So this essentially would cut the resource sharing component in half, leaving $59,917.24 for the formula that is in the plan, and taking the $60,000 out of that line and putting it into the processing allotments that I suggested adding as part of the amendment. Good on that?
So that's just frankly where the money that we'd like to, or we are considering amending to add back in is coming from. That,
How we're funding it, yeah. That's exactly what this is suggesting.
okay, got it.
Okay. So having said that, and the reason again for that line being chosen was that was the line that's a brand new allotment or grant. So it was not something that was being spent before. And I'm arguing in the case that $101,000 of the MOUs is being put towards $119,000 to fund that line. So, but having said that, I also point out that there were some restrictions on this proposal. First of all, during the June 9th meeting, Hayes and Salina, it was implied, or at least it was said, that Hayes and Salina would be welcome to have their processing through Ingram like other members of the system. And I believe it was implied that that could begin essentially immediately or soon thereafter. In that case, if Salina and Hayes wanted to move forward with processing through Ingram, they would not be eligible for this processing allotment. That's one or the other is what this is suggesting. If the board was to suggest a gradual reduction over 3 or 4 years of the processing grant, that would still be in place. So say Hayes or Salina decide, okay, we're not going to switch this year, but next year we want to move to processing through CKLS. Then they would lose whatever money is allotted that year and would move towards that new way of processing. Does that make sense, Stephen?
Yeah.
Going down here. So that's essentially the components of this. And this is done both within the tentative budget document as well as the actual system plan. These changes are in both places. Are there any other questions about this document before I show you what it looks like more at the other libraries level as well?
The only, the one thing I think probably should be adjusted, and it's very minor, is having those full payments due in January. It would be, I think, better if it were split in half. So in the second half of the year, July 1st would be the other half of the payment. The systems are not unlike city libraries like ours here in Andover, in that we don't receive all of our taxes in one lump sum at the start of the year. It is divided out, and that's how Andover receives our grants from the South Central Kansas Library System. Is we have 2 major payments. So that's just one suggestion I have for this.
And any suggestions you guys want to make to change this are perfectly fine. I will say the January 2024 date was selected because that's currently when Hayes and Salina received their processing grant as one fund, as one expense. So just want to.
Okay, that makes sense. I suppose you could keep it that way. I was just thinking about from the system's perspective.
Any thoughts from the committee about that particular component?
I think, sorry, go ahead, Ray.
No, go ahead, Tom.
Well, I was just saying that, you know, this proposal is not going to please everyone to the full extent, but it seems to be a middle ground, at least for this 2024 budget. And then I think our committee's work is going to continue, and I think we'll need to take a deeper look into the way the system is structured, what are the goals, things like that. But I think with our short timeline, I think this has a lot of opportunity to pass, you know, the full State Library of Kansas board. I think would support this based on my understanding of what, and my interpretation of our last full board meeting.
Would you like to see how this plays out in the system based on some data that we have?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to preface this with, this is based on data that is provided, some of it by CKLS, some of it's calculated by Excel, and some of it was calculated based on the information we had. So this Excel sheet over here starts with the purple columns. These are taken from the document from CKLS that was provided as part of the 2023 plan to explain to the State Library Board what the base grant were, what the per capita grants were, what the service allotment was for 2023. So that information was pulled from a Google document that is, or Excel document that's already published and available publicly. The tan columns are from this tan document we received at the State Library Board meeting with that information that was provided, some of the information that was provided in there. The gray columns are calculations in Excel based on some changes to see where changes occurred. The greenish color, whatever color that you call that, this is model 2. That is the resource sharing allotment. There is a percentage that's provided in the electronic version of this document of what percentage each library makes up of the overall out-of-district borrowers for the whole system. That was multiplied, as you can see here. You can't see here, this is a different document, but is multiplied times the 59,917.24 to figure out what part of that amount would bring the total to 59,917.24. So that's what the totals is of all of these. Okay, but that is based on the percentage provided in the electronic version of the TAN document. So what this is doing is it's comparing each of the components based on the black lines here. So it's looking at the population-based components of the 2023 plan. So here's the total of the two, the base grant and the per capita, and the base system grant population that was presented in the gray, or sorry, the beige document here. One thing to note, and these are what's in the red font, there were a number of libraries that changed categories. I believe it was mentioned during CKLS's presentation that several libraries were in a different category than what they should be at this point, and those were adjusted in the 2024 plan. As you can see, there are several of them. In fact, it looks like 16 of them that were switched to a lower category. I think one actually went up as well, but this is showing the reductions. This doesn't mean there's a reduction in the base grant. It just means they've been moved to a different category and they would have seen a higher increase had they stayed in the category they were in. Does that make sense? Okay. So then the gray column is looking at the population calculation difference between the total population allotment for 23 and the 24 base grant allotment based on population. So let me go back out of this filter. So you can see how that plays out in this information. Then you can look at, in this next grouping, the out-of-district borrower component. In 2023, as I mentioned, it was called the Public Library Service Allotment. We have the formula for that in the 2023 plan. And then the 2024 formula is vastly different than what was in 2023. What you will notice when you look through this column is there's a lot of red, meaning a lot of loss in what they were receiving from the out-of-district borrower, essentially compensation, we'll say. Except in this case, you'll see there was a drastic increase in Hayes and a smaller increase in Salina from the old formula to the new formula. Okay. The next grouping, or the next thing, is to calculate the difference for that out-of-district borrower, and then what is the combination of the two. Before we get to that resource sharing component that I'm putting the amendment forward to change, not the formula itself, but the amount we're putting towards that formula. This is showing what the difference is for the other two components and where losses occurred. Okay, and we'll look at the losses a little more closely in a second. I just want to go over the whole document first. The green column looks at the 59,917.24 times the percentage in the beige sheet, the electronic version of it, and then adds that to the total of the other two and looks at what losses and gains were made by each library in the system. In column Q, we had 4 libraries that wrote letters to show what effect this would have on them. So you can see there's a net increase in the information that I have. That's the information that's available for each of those 4 libraries. And then over here, I listed the total revenue for the libraries that saw a reduction overall. So I'm going to actually go down to those filtered by color. So here are the libraries that actually saw, filtered by text color of red, showing a reduction, that lost money under this proposed amendment. What I would note is you see there were a number of libraries in this grouping that were categorized incorrectly previously and dropped down a level. So a chunk of the funding, such as from Concordia, can be attributed to that. They went from 19,600 to 11,000. But when you add per capita, it was even larger loss of 10,562. So you see that information. If you look again, a lot of the out of district borrower difference is another reduction. And then they obviously made money because it's a brand new component in the column O, but it wasn't necessarily enough to offset the losses elsewhere. Maybe had essentially, if you think of this, we're putting half by this amendment, it's half of the money CKLS originally allocated for the resource sharing component. You could double these amounts to figure out, well, what would it have been had we just left it the way it was, and then compare that to what they lost overall. So looking at all this, then I went through and looked at the total revenue. This was provided, I believe it's from the public library survey, but it was provided in this document that CKLS submitted for the state library board meeting. So I just used the numbers that were from that. And the percentage loss is indicated. One thing that we know that is off at the moment is, I believe CKLS mentioned that there were OCLC ILL requests that are not incorporated into the percentages that were provided to the state library board. I do not know, have not been provided the information to change that. This is again just working from the data we have. But I wanted to see how this would affect the libraries in the system, because that was important to me. And you'll notice Hayes and Salina aren't really fully calculated out here with the loss of the MOUs, but we're just looking at the components of the other pieces of the grants and allotments that are based on population, out of district borrowers, and resource sharing. Does all this information sort of make sense the way it's organized?
Having you walk through it has been very helpful. Do you have a number of what the difference for 2023 to 2024 would be for Hayes and for Salina? Just those two specific. I know we found the number for the plan as submitted, but based on this amendment.
Yes, this isn't looking at all the components. It's the first thing to mention. So I think we can look at Hayes and Salina and see what it looks like just in these components, but recognize that it doesn't include the loss of the MLUs, depending on what this committee and what the board decides to do. Again, no, we need Hayes too. Oh, this would work. Maybe I just scroll up here. I can't show both at the same time at the moment, but let's look at Hayes first. So overall, this, again, we know Salina's information isn't fully in here, but overall, this is what it's looking like based on the information I have at the moment. And then Salina, we get to move on to Salina. Give me a second. Salina, this is what it's looking like at the moment. If we go back to the MOUs, I believe it's at 16,800, which is what, 5,600 per library, including Great Bend. And 5,000 split between two libraries, 2,500. So that's 8,100, right, for each of those libraries, just from those MOUs. And then on top of that, there is the loss of, at least in the proposed amendment, of $10,000 from the processing grant. So that's what it would be, $18,100. Correct, if that amendment was moved forward with. And in this case, Salina is seeing an increase on the other side of 16,254. And in the case of Hayes, 11,044. Does that help answer that question? Yeah, this doesn't look at the other components, but
Yeah, I think the overall amount, you know, what is Hayes getting in the 2023 plan versus what would they expect to get under the 2024 amended system plan?
this assumes all the numbers that are provided are
Yeah, we'd
accurate.
have to. So that's definitely less of a loss than the proposed system plan.
Would you like me to go back to the other libraries that are seeing losses to look at that again? Or what do you want me to do at this
Oh,
point?
that made sense to me. And I think you're right, you can attribute it to the differences in size category, as well as some of them had different sort of resource sharing or out of district borrowers. And I appreciate that you had the libraries that sent letters separated, or that you were able to sort that. That was good.
Any other questions for me?
Rhoda, Steve?
I have this document as my full screen, so I can't see the other that was in the packet. Can you remind me how many libraries total are in this system?
It's 56, 50 something. Hold on. We can find that out quickly here. No, 51 minus, okay, there's two up here. 53.
Steve and Rhoda. I know this is hard to do, but do you think that the full State Library of Kansas Advisory Board would find these changes palpable? Do we think our fellow board members would agree to this?
I think the recommendation is certainly more of a compromise, and certainly more workable to the two libraries that are greatest affected. I think it meets the immediate solution. And I know with the recommendation of gradual reduction from that point forward, but I think probably more than just gradual reduction, guidelines might have to be suggested, but I know this is just the immediate plan. But I mean, I think for the immediate purposes, it seems more workable, yes.
I would tend to agree with Rhoda, Tom. This moves us in a better direction for this particular problem. It doesn't solve it long term. Doesn't solve the dilemmas pointed out by Hayes and Salina long term, but it gets us moving in the right direction. I think, if I'm not mistaken, there was some words from one of the attorneys saying that moving in the right direction would be a good option at this point.
I appreciate that feedback, and I agree. I think we're talking the immediacy of the 2024 budget and system plan, and then our committee will resume a meeting to look at the concerns brought forward by Hayes beyond just the immediate budget. Do either of you have any suggestions or changes to this proposal by Ray? I know I mentioned that perhaps splitting up the payments into 6 months. Other than that,
No, I do want to say thank you so much for that spreadsheet. I think that is extremely helpful.
I have nothing to add, Tom.
okay, the next step would be to determine if we endorse this a proposed amendment to the CKLS system plan. Just a formal yes or no from both of you.
Yes, I would endorse it.
Yes, I would also, Tom.
Okay, the amendment has been endorsed by the committee. We will bring that forth to the overall State Library of Kansas Board at our next meeting. We have some things to do on our next committee meeting. Update on all the documents received. We've gotten a lot of documents since our last meeting. We've gotten documents since the last meeting of the State Library of Kansas Advisory Board. Ray, do you want to point out anything here as to update on documents received?
I think based on previous correspondence, we were going to allow CKLS to respond
That's
to
right.
the document that we received from Hayes a few days ago that's included at the beginning of your packet.
Yeah.
It's up to the committee, obviously, what additional information you would like, but we're getting to a point where I think some of the arguments are going in circles.
Yes, and that was the point that Gail Santee actually brought up in one of the letters was, too much back and forth, and that's why we have expressed our appreciation for the A to Z document that Central Kansas Library System had. That was very helpful. So in terms of what additional information is needed, CKLS has the right to respond to the latest letter from the Hayes Public Library Board's attorney. I think it would be good if we had someone from both Central Kansas Library System, Hayes Public Library, as well as Salina Public Library, just look at those numbers that you walked through, Ray. I want to make sure that they understand it, and that that those numbers, as you stated, it makes sense. I'm not looking for any editorializing or any commentary. Just do those numbers based on the description. Does that sound right? I think it'd be helpful to hear from them.
Can I ask you a question, Tom? Then?
Yeah, sure.
If CKLS wanted to submit updated percentages on the resource sharing, would you want me to fix that before the State Library Board meeting, if that was available?
I think because you have such a fantastic spreadsheet, I think you'd be able to plop that data in pretty easily and come up with a slight adjustment. But again, like these system plans they're plans. It's not a hard and fast budget. It's because they have based on the property evaluations for the full taxing areas. So this is the start, this is the guideline. Steve or Rhoda, is there anything else you'd like to see from either Hayes or Central Kansas Library System?
I don't think at this time for me, Tom.
Okay. All right. In that case, let's try to see if we can schedule the next meeting of the subcommittee here. We can do that without doing a poll. Let's see. Pull up my calendar. Because we do have a board meeting scheduled.
Yeah, that's scheduled now for the 27th.
Are there days that don't work for you, Rhoda or Steve?
Tom,
Yes.
you froze up on me for a minute.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw that. So I was just looking at the scheduling a meeting of our subcommittee for the week of the July 17th. My schedule is very open at this point, other than I have a short meeting on the morning of the 18th. Are there days or times that we need to avoid for either of you?
17th or 18th of July work for me.
Okay. Rhoda, are you free on either of those days?
I believe I am. I'm logging onto my calendar right now.
This is Charles Machers, your counsel. I have a conflict on the 18th with another meeting. That's an all-day meeting.
Thanks, Charles. See if we can't do something on the 17th.
Mhm.
Okay, so it looks like we're flexible. So Ray, if you'll look at your calendar and see what works best for you. I think,
The morning of the 17th,
okay,
say
that
10
sounds
a.m.
good. 10 a.m. is great.
Sure.
Pencil that in.
Go ahead and send out the invite though, Ray.
Will do.
Please. Is there any other business for our committee at this time?
Tom, this is Randy. May I ask a question?
Please.
I just want to confirm then for the upcoming state library full board meeting that we have scheduled Tuesday, if I recall. We will have your recommendation, your committee's recommendation on the CKLS plan and the chart and or the wording of Ray's amendment, and that's what we'll be considering. Will that be sent out or will it be out in advance, I guess, for the full board members?
It will need to be
Okay.
at least the data. But yeah, Ray's document, the narrative document, the PDF, as well as the spreadsheet. And if Ray, if you can update the Excel sheet, that's great. If you can't, that's fine, because it does need to go out to the system board. Probably by noon on Friday, if possible, just so everyone has a chance to look at it prior to our next full board meeting.
So if the goal is to get a packet out by noon on Friday, I think we need to set a deadline for when Hayes, Salina, and CKLS can send me information to update the Excel, or not update, but responding to your earlier request.
Sure.
Of maybe 4 p.m. on Thursday, which I know is literally tomorrow, but we're in a short timeline.
Yeah, and all we're asking is just for them to look at the numbers. We're not asking for commentary or just confirm the numbers.
Okay, so we'll set the deadline for 4 p.m. Thursday for that. And then are you going to write some kind of letter or something to include with the packet from the committee of endorsing said plan?
I can do that.
Did you want me to split it in half, the allotment between two different pay periods? Or do you want to make that amendment from the floor? If you want to do that?
I would just split it in half.
Split it in half, okay. So the other payment would be due June or July, I guess?
July 1st, yeah.
July 31st or whatever,
Yeah,
okay.
1st of July, I think is the whatever, you know, first business day in July.
July 1st, 2024. Okay. And then what I would recommend is maybe also having a red lined version of the CKLS plan showing the changes that are in the amendment. Would that be useful?
Yeah, that really would. I think that would help a lot. Is that I think that's what the rest of the board would appreciate that.
Okay. So Tom, if you can get me that letter by 4 p.m. on Thursday as well.
Yes.
I will get that in there, and then we'll get out what we can Friday by noon.
Okay.
And go from there.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Without any, is there anything else before we leave? I think we have our action items, and I thank you for your time, everyone. Have a nice rest of your afternoon.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks.